Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Spectator Sports. I'm your host Sebastian Fonseca coming in with episode 52, and we have a loaded episode for you guys today. But before we get into it, please do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Take a look at our Instagram and TikTok pages, and for my listeners on Spotify, if you could give us a 5-star review, be greatly appreciated. All links are in the description. Jalen Hurts and the Philadelphia Eagles have announced a massive contract extension, 5 years, $255 million. And notes for the Ravens and Lamar Jackson, this is how you get a contract extension done. Quick, easy, painless. This was already done with a year remaining on Jalen Hurts' current deal. And I mean, well done to Howie Roseman, well done to Jalen Hurts and his representation. Pretty easy stuff there. And it was a quick, painless process. Now both sides are locked in for 6 years total, including this upcoming season in 2023. And now, when you look at the contract and you break down how it actually affects the cap, it's actually a pretty team-friendly deal. Just like how Patrick Mahomes made a team-friendly deal to keep him in Kansas City for the foreseeable future, Jalen Hurts took a similar route. We got to see how the contract is laid out, and of course, there's still pen to sign to the paper, but assuming that everything goes well, we're going to have Jalen Hurts in Philadelphia for many years to come. And he's already coming off of a historic third year. I mean, the jump that he made from year 2 to year 3 is astronomical. To talk about just his come-up story, I mean, he was a guy that was a coach's son, very respectful in his days in Texas, signed on with the Alabama Crimson Tide, lost the national championship game, then was benched the next year for Tua, and then still stuck around Alabama for his third year, then only transferred a year later to Oklahoma, was the Heisman runner-up there, became a second-round pick, beat out Carson Wentz, the presumed starter in 2020, became the full-time starter in 2021, and now take that massive leap in 2022, out-dueling Patrick Mahomes in Super Bowl 57 in a losing attempt, but still, he's been able to prove that he is a guy that is a total dual-threat quarterback with the arm, the legs, and now the Philadelphia Eagles can build around him. Remember, they have 2 first-round draft picks in Thursday's draft. One is a top 10 pick, and the other one is number 30 overall. The Eagles have a ton of assets to utilize to help build a team around Jalen Hurts, keeping the offense pretty much intact. I mean, Devontae Smith is the next guy probably up for a contract extension, but they locked up Dallas Goedert. They have the offensive line pretty much the same as intact. You get to see another year of Jason Kelce, and they restocked the offensive line too. So pretty much most of the guys will be protecting Jalen Hurts. I definitely expect the Eagles to make a couple moves to add depth to the offensive line as part of building that for the future. And yeah, there's a chance they could add in a wide receiver or maybe a tight end to help out back up Dallas Goedert. But defensively is probably the more bigger concerns. And if you pair that in with this offense that already was pretty much unstoppable for the most part of 2022, this Eagles team is going to be a contender for many years to come. I only see the San Francisco 49ers being a team that could potentially get in the Eagles' way, because with Aaron Rodgers leaving the Green Bay Packers to the New York Jets, the NFC is totally wide open, and the Eagles are, I would say, a tier above the 49ers, and then it's just the rest of the pack. But we'll see what happens. I mean, of course, there are a lot of things left to prove and a lot of things yet to come up in this offseason, but right now, as presently constructed, the Eagles should be favorites in the NFC. So I talked about the Suns briefly, and now to talk about in detail about this team, I mean, they've gotten some luck from the injury gods. The LA Clippers, unfortunately, have been falling apart since my last episode, mainly due to Kawhi Leonard. We saw that he had that great performance. We saw he had a great performance in Game 1. I mean, 38, 5, and 5. That's pretty much what you saw out of Kawhi in 2020 and even 2019 with the Toronto Raptors. But he's missed games 3 and 4 in LA with the chance for them to hold home court advantage. Now, they ended up losing both games, and now they're down 3-1. With them not having Kawhi Leonard, their chances have pretty much dried up. I respect a ton of credit to Russell Westbrook for holding his own, taking over as the number 1 option in this Clippers offense, but just unfortunate that we just didn't get to see the Clippers have all the horses, and that's just been the historic thing about these Clippers, especially with Kawhi Leonard. Going back to San Antonio Spurs days, he missed the 2018 playoffs due to that knee tendinopathy thing, and then in 2017, he also missed due to an ankle injury. So durability is a big thing. We know that with Kawhi Leonard, and for a guy that stresses load management and doesn't play a lot of back-to-backs, missing about 20 to 25% of the season just due to load managing, it doesn't really translate to a lot of postseason success. But that's why the Clippers want to keep him fresh. We saw that in Toronto. It worked, yes. That was a one-off in this whole load management scheme that they've done, but since then, it hasn't. And yeah, injuries are a freak thing, but there's just something totally wrong with Kawhi and his body. We know ever since that ACL injury, the knee hasn't recovered the way that he's truly wanted it to. Now, he hasn't had any follow-up surgery since, but just the treatment and rehab hasn't been the same compared to what other players have recovered from in a torn ACL. I just don't know what the outlook on Kawhi Leonard's career is in the future. I see him maybe trying to go for another 2-3 years, but if these injuries continue to pile up, I don't know if the Clippers also have the patience, because coming into the summer of 2019, you pair him with Paul George, who also hasn't been completely available himself because he's out so far this postseason and probably going to miss the entire series. And those two haven't gotten it together. We've seen other pieces just been consistently injured for this Clippers team, and they're snake bitten and cursed, arguably. So sad to see, because I love Ty Lue, great head coach, arguably one of the best in the league presently in the NBA, but just has been injury bitten constantly. And major respect for them getting this far. And again, talk about Russell Westbrook. Him holding his own against KD and Devin Booker when the Suns are at full strength, that was keeping the Clippers at least somewhat alive or somewhat afloat. The Clippers to fade out in Game 5 on the road in Phoenix, and we're going to see the Denver Nuggets take on the Phoenix Suns in the conference semifinals. On Sunday, we got to see Game 4 of the Warriors and Kings series, and since my last recording, a ton of things have happened since Game 1. Game 2, we got to see a lot of nice postseason basketball between the up-and-coming Kings. The Kings held their own, and that was partially thanks to some demonstrative behavior that we're seeing out of our favorite guy, Draymond Green. Draymond, as we have talked about numerous times on this podcast, has been a loose cannon, not being able to keep his emotions in check. Lost his cool when Sabonis went down, and yes, Sabonis did grab at his legs, but I feel that Sabonis was trying to protect himself from either getting kicked and somehow just aggravated Draymond to go with the full wind-up and stomp hard on his ribcage. Of course, Sabonis did sell it. He did the whole soccer routine, selling the injury and the pain, all that stuff. Draymond was subsequently ejected from the game. I thought that was fair just because that's been part of his track record, but also just because he incited almost a riot in Sacramento. He was jawing at the fans. It's one thing for the fans to do that and then Draymond go back at him or jump into the stands, kind of like Malice in the Palace. But it didn't get that bad, thankfully, for the Kings fans. But still, it was just a risky situation given that the commissioner, Adam Silver, was in attendance of that game. The NBA has done a lot of things to try and rid the recent fans' memory of the Malice at the Palace. So just to set that same precedent, to say that this behavior is absolutely no longer tolerated in the NBA, they enforced a suspension. So Draymond missed Game 3. Draymond had a lot of things to say. I had a lot of things to say about that, but here we are in Game 4. The Warriors came back and they won Game 3, so that means they're heading into Game 4 down 2-1, and it's the pivotal game. Either the Kings win, they take that control and are up 3-1, or the Warriors tie up the series at 2-2, and now it's a best of 3. Game 4 starts, and Draymond takes the approach of coming off the bench, and I have to give him credit for that. He talked about that there is something that he doesn't want to set the precedent of just expecting to be a starter after coming off suspension. I think I really respect that aspect. I know that I've talked about him being selfish, which I still think he is. He's been selfish for punching teammates or calling KD the B word, this and that, and putting his team in precarious situations due to his behavior. But just that kind of little moment right there, I think is very important. And Jordan Poole got the start, ironically. It was really a back and forth affair throughout game 4. The Kings were in control for most of that first half. Warriors slowly chipped away, made it a close ball game, and then, like any other Warriors game that we've seen in the past, the third quarter is really the pivotal quarter. And then we saw that big avalanche. The Warriors outscored the Kings by 14 points, really seized control. I mean, they were up 10, and every time in that fourth quarter, we saw the Kings get on the fast break, which they love to do. I mean, they are the faster team compared to the older, slower Warriors. Despite them being a ball movement type of team, the Kings are just so fast, and this is obviously led by De'Aaron Fox. He's one of the fastest point guards in today's game. And every time they got on the break, and especially when Sabonis was handling the ball, he turned the ball over. There was just an errant pass. Even Malik Monk had some erroneous passes too, where they had easy looks at the basket. They just couldn't get that final pass. Major credit again to Draymond. I mean, he got some key deflections in there to stop those fast breaks. And just him as the primary defender, especially against De'Aaron Fox, he held Fox to 2 out of 7. So, I mean, he still has a lot left in the tank. Talk about Sabonis in particular. Sabonis is a 7-footer, and Draymond, we can say he's 6'7". It's just, the size comparison is just not even close, but the strength component favors Draymond. And it's just so inexcusable. I mean, just the fact that you're the bigger player and you're getting out-muscled in the block by Draymond right now. I mean, major credit to Draymond for holding his own, but Sabonis needs to stop playing soft. This is just inexcusable. There's too many times you're falling down. Just stay on the block, stay on your feet, go after those rebounds, go up strong with 2 hands, basic fundamentals. And that was really the difference in this game. So Kings end up losing, and we did see towards the end of the game a big bonehead mistake by surprisingly Stephen Curry. Steph called a timeout when the Warriors didn't have a timeout, and that's kind of pulling a Chris Webber move back to those Fab 5 days in Michigan in the 90s, and we all know about that. Nearly set off a catastrophic set of events for the Warriors. I mean, the Kings got a free throw, then they cashed in a 3 by De'Aaron Fox, cut the deficit that was once 5 down to 1, and then they got a stop and they had a timeout, advanced the ball. Pretty much it's do or die. You get a stop, it's 2-2. If you don't, you're down 3-1 and you're heading over to Sacramento. And then they find a way to get a stop. Big props again to Draymond for shutting off something that De'Aaron Fox really likes to do, and that is a pull-up elbow jump shot. We've seen that throughout the series and throughout the season. So he cut off that lane as he had to help defense, and then in desperation, Fox had to get rid of the ball because time was running out. And the only really available option that he could see was on the left wing to Harrison Barnes. And Harrison Barnes decided to channel his 2016 Harrison Barnes and clank it off the rim. We all know in 2016, Harrison Barnes was probably one of the worst shooters ever in that series. I mean, a huge reason why the Warriors lost the series. It wasn't just thanks to Draymond's suspension or the injuries to Bogut and Iguodala. Every time Harrison Barnes was on the court, it was like 4-on-5 between the Cavs and the Warriors at the time because they were getting nothing out of the small forward position. That's my little take on Harrison Barnes. But to get back to the game and the series, the Kings now have lost momentum. They had a huge opportunity, especially with Draymond suspended in Game 3 to go up 3-0. And now they're heading back to their home court with 2 home games, thankfully, and the Warriors have been atrocious on the road. But the Warriors have momentum. They're the veteran team. They have been there, they've done that, and you're telling me all they have to do is just find a way to steal one game, a place where they have played very well in the games 1 and 2. Maybe they make some tweaks and they steal Game 5. If they do so, I think the series is over in 6 games. The Warriors would close them out in 6 back at Chase Arena, but we'll see what happens. The Kings do have an extra day, and I expect Mike Brown to make some adequate changes too to the lineup and this his game plan, because right now in the chessboard, it's his turn to make a move. The Philadelphia 76ers are the first team to punch their ticket to the conference semifinals, and yes, it came at a bit of a price, but they disposed of the Brooklyn Nets in 4 games, completing a sweep on Saturday. And I mean, overall, the best part about it is that they were able to get that series out quickly. I expected them to be out of that series at least in 5 games. They did it 1 quicker, and in Game 4 they did it without Joel Embiid. And now Embiid, right on schedule, he is missing another postseason game. Every series except the 2020 bubble season, he has missed at least a game in their postseason run. And this just goes back to this whole durability thing that I'm very big on. I talk about on this podcast, the best ability in sports is availability. You can be as talented as you want. You can be a great player that we've seen in Kawhi Leonard. He's a 2-time finals MVP, 2-time NBA champ, but hasn't been available the last 3 years in a row. And then if you want to count those 2 seasons with the Spurs, and 5 postseason runs we haven't seen Kawhi Leonard be a part of. Joel, he's missed the first 2 years of his pro career, and he's been able to be part of postseason runs, but durability is a huge thing I have with Joel Embiid. It's just too many times this guy's so big, but he either falls in such an awkward way, it's just so clumsy, and then he gets so prone to injuries. And something happens or another that he gets hurt. It goes back to him and AD. Those are 2 guys that I just don't understand. They're just so physically gifted, but they just can't shake this injury bug for whatever reason. They're just some guys that are just very, very brittle. While we talk about how at least Joel Embiid and Anthony Davis are like guys in street clothes, especially Anthony Davis, we also have to talk about that with Kawhi Leonard. I talked about it briefly that Kawhi has been a guy that just hasn't been there, but we've given him a pass just because he's been that 2-time champ, 2-time finals MVP. Compared to the other 2, those accomplishments are infinitely greater than what the other 2 have done. But so just because you've done things in the past doesn't mean it changes anything on your current outlook, right? The NBA and sports in general is about what have you done for me lately? Every day you have to update your resume. And we're seeing, at least out of Kawhi, he's been stagnating because of these injuries. And while Joel and AD have been banged up and missing time, at least recently they've been able to switch that trend and been a little bit more available, especially Joel Embiid. Now, I would like to see him play at least 70 games. That would be nice. Same thing with AD. At least Joel is probably going to lock up an MVP award, but we'll see what happens if he can come back, because it's looking like Doc is not too optimistic about Joel's chances to start the series, because the series will most likely start Saturday or Sunday next weekend, and it's a very good chance Joel will at least miss game 1, if not game 2. I think if anything, you like him to be there at least by game 2, but game 1 is kind of a throwaway anyways. The road team is just going to see what the home team does, and they'll make their tweaks and really go after it in game 2. If the Sixers are without Joel Embiid, if he's missing more than just the first 2 games of the conference semifinal matchup, presumably against the Celtics, it's pretty much over from there, and it's just going to be another stain on Joel's career so far, just in terms of durability. The Knicks and the Cavs have become pretty much like box office TV, especially for the Knicks. Good days are happening for the New York Knicks, as now, after stealing game 1 in Cleveland, they were able to hold serve and take a commanding 3-1 series lead, the latest one being on Sunday against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Game 4 was just not a good day for Donovan Mitchell. He's been the guy that's been carrying the Cavaliers for most of this series. Darius Garland had a putrid game in game 3, but had a really nice game in game 4. And that was just simply offset by the poor play that we saw out of Donovan Mitchell. I mean, 5 out of 18. Very, very bad. And if he is their best player and he's not playing that well, your chances of getting a game on the road are slim to none. And major credit to the Knicks. I mean, we talked about how they've been an up-and-coming team most of the season, but we just need to see if they can win a postseason series. 1 game away from doing so for the first time in a decade since Carmelo Anthony was part of the Knicks. And I expect them to close out the series in 6 games. I think the Cavs will find a way to force a game 6 on their home court, but they'll bow out on the road at MSG. Kind of the opposite of my initial prediction, but I mean, mainly thanks to Jalen Brunson. I mean, Brunson, I think, has to be named the best player for the New York Knicks. Despite him not having the accolades of being an all-star this season, which again, I think he was greatly snubbed from the all-star team this year, but nonetheless, Julius Randle has not been the go-to guy or the best player for the Knicks. In terms of impact, Julius Randle has been a negative in his limited postseason career. Back 2 years ago against the Atlanta Hawks, he was a total disappearing act for the New York Knicks. He shot well below 30%. He's barely shooting 35% for this series. I know he's banged up with this ankle injury, and that's something to take account for, but still, you expect an all-star to be shooting better than sub 35% in a postseason game, and it's been 4 games. Only 7 points. Thankfully, Jalen Brunson came to the rescue, and also, major shout out to RJ Barrett. I've talked about how he needs to step up too as one of these other young guys for the New York Knicks, and he's done so in Game 4. If he can replicate that performance later on in this series, the Knicks will be able to punch their ticket to the conference semifinals as well. In the quarterfinals for the 2023 Champions League trophy, it's been a little bit of a snooze fest. Real Madrid wiped the floor with the hapless Chelsea Blues, and now Chelsea is mercifully out of the Champions League again by Real Madrid for the 2nd consecutive year. And Chelsea, at their best, they were pretty good in the first half in leg 2, but just did not have the finishing ability. Simply outclassed by the better team. I never expected them to beat them, and I expected a blowout, to be honest, and that's what happened. So I don't really even blame Frank Lampard at this point. He's just trying to pick up the pieces and just hold on for dear life until the end of the season. This team is just completely lost. And I mean, major credit though to Los Blancos for handling their stuff. They got it done quickly, comfortably, and now they're into the Champions League semifinals to set up a matchup against Man City. And this is going to be a rematch of 2022's semifinal matchup where we saw the two meet up, where 2 minutes to go, you thought Man City was going to coast, but with a 2-goal lead. With 2 minutes to go last year in leg 2, City was up 2 goals, and then Rodrigo came in with a brace in the last 2 minutes and forced extra time. Benzema did the rest, and you all know what happened. This time, they beat Bayern Munich pretty handedly. I love Thomas Tuchel, but he is totally shit the bed over in Bayern Munich. I mean, they were in so many competitions, and he's actually been able to lose as many games as Nagelsmann has in his entire Bayern career, and that's just wild to me. Bayern is definitely a mess right now. They could end up losing their Bundesliga title to Dortmund this season, so we'll see what happens there. But pretty scary times for Bayern Munich right now. But to talk about Man City, they were able to handle business quite comfortably, and with their other win over the weekend against Sheffield United, they're also in the FA Cup final as well. I talked about in last week's episode how City is juggling for 3 trophies right now as they're going for the treble. They are in the semifinals of Champions League. They're in the final in a Manchester derby for the FA Cup. And then they are still very much alive for the EPL title as well. Biggest difference from last year to this year has been Erling Haaland. And I think Haaland will make his impact known against a team like Los Blancos. I mean, Real Madrid is a team that is super dangerous. I expect them to play very, very tightly and be the favorites going into this because they have the veteran experience compared to Manchester City. But if I were to make a prediction, I think this year is when the firepower for Man City actually fires on all cylinders, and they finally get past Real Madrid and exact those demons from last year to book a spot in the Champions League final. I think in the top half of the bracket, I think that is the true Champions League final for this season. I really like that we're getting 2 legs too, because it's a pretty good amount of sample size to see who is the better team after 2 legs. In the bottom half of the bracket, we get to see an all Milan semifinal. That is really exciting. AC Milan got past the Serie A leaders in Napoli. They booked a spot in the semifinals, and then Inter beat Benfica in the quarterfinals, and that's setting up this all Milan semifinal. Early thoughts is that they're really neck and neck in Serie A too. Now, Inter has beaten Milan earlier this season, also in Italian Supercoppa as well. And then AC beat them early on in the season in the very early stages of Serie A. So I think that doesn't have as much weight into this matchup. The city's just going to be at each other's throats between Inter fans and then AC Milan fans. I don't know how the dynamics are really going to go down, but I do think that Inter has just enough to beat AC, and we'll see Inter take on Manchester City in the Champions League final in 2023. It was Saturday night, and we got to see the LA Lakers take on the Memphis Grizzlies. This time the series shifts over to LA. The Grizzlies were able to respond despite not having Ja Morant in the lineup in Game 2. They blew out the Lakers to tie the series at 1 apiece. And then after the game, Dillon Brooks ran his mouth and he talked post-game about LeBron is just too old and just ran his mouth a little bit too much. And pre-game in Game 3, in the warm-up stages, they had I wouldn't say a heated exchange. It was just a very interesting exchange between the two. In the game itself, the Lakers just dismantled the Grizzlies from start to finish. Now, Ja did come back in Game 3, and he had a pretty heroic 45-point game. In terms of scoring output, he scored 45 points to keep the Grizzlies afloat. That wasn't the main headline in this. The Lakers outscored the Grizzlies 35-9 in the opening frame. Never was too close. The final margin was 10 points, yes, but I think really it was like a 20-point win for the Lakers. They were just really dominant from start to finish. And in terms of Dillon Brooks, he talked a lot of trash between games 2 and 3. Did not show up at all in game 3 at all. He ended up being ejected for a punch to LeBron's groin, and I'm surprised based on the refereeing that we've seen this week with James Harden being ejected. No suspension there. We saw Joel Embiid kick Nick Claxton in the groin, and that was given a flagrant 1. Really interesting decision there in terms of flagrant foul points and decisions and ejections, all in that. No suspensions were handed out. I think the only suspension was given out to Draymond was because of his track record, but Dillon Brooks also has a track record too. I mean, in a very short amount of time, he's been suspended for technical fouls. He's got suspended from a postseason game last year for that dirty foul on Gary Payton II. I don't know. I thought for sure he would be suspended based on that pretty good. It was a good jab punch to LeBron's groin, and he was down for a little bit. But credit to LeBron, he didn't make a ton out of it. Now, I'm pretty sure he couldn't because he was punching the groin, so as anybody who has problems in that area after taking a hit there, not too fun, so you can't really do anything at that moment, but responded with his play, and that's what he really does. He plays mind tricks on any opponent, really. He is by far the smartest basketball player I've ever seen. Obviously, he has the physical gifts that no other basketball player has been gifted in terms of genetics and skill set, but in terms of that Jedi mind tricks that he plays, it's just on a whole nother level. His basketball memory is second to none. We've heard him break down plays from years ago, and still he knows it like the back of his hand. And for him to do this at age 38, year 20, again, speaks to what he can do in his career. The Lakers are in control, and I think if they were to hold on to home court advantage in Game 4, this series is probably going to be over in 6 games. A big Game 4 that's going to come up. I mean, that's another game that Ja is available for us. The Lakers shouldn't take a night off in that set either. They need to have that same sense of urgency, get behind the home crowd, and finish this off in 6 games. And we'll see what happens, but because them and the winner of that Kings-Warriors matchup is in for a dogfight in the conference semifinals. So let's buckle up and see what happens the rest of this postseason, because there's going to be a lot of entertaining action across the second round when we get those matchups set up. That's it for this episode of Spectator Sports. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. Like I said before, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Take a look at our Instagram and TikTok pages. And for my Spotify listeners, give us a 5-star review. It makes a massive difference on that platform. All links, like I said, are in the description. Until next time, as always, stay safe.